So what this presentation is an overview of the Verde River from the perspective of the Nature Conservancy. Many of you are aware I've been our director for our Verde River program for the last 5 years, approaching 6. And during that time, we have felt that there has, well, let me say that from the point of view of the Nature Conservancy, decisions about a river as important as the Verde need to be being made from objective science. There are many different kinds of sciences, as we well know, physical, but also human sciences. We're going to talk a little bit about economics and a couple of other things today, as well as hard sciences. That decisions need to be made from good, solid ground, and that for many years, most of the science that we've all received has been the science of hydrology. And I think that most of us are convinced that the Verde is at risk hydrologically, and among the things that the Conservancy has tried to do is to fill some of the data gaps or the holes in some of the other sciences that leaders, elected leaders and others, need to understand in order to assure that that when decisions are made about the Verde, that they're made with all of our communities and all of our various social interests in mind. So what this is going to be a quick sketch of a number of studies that are either just out or will soon be out that will help those of you in the public or those of you in the media or in elected offices or whatever to be able to make decisions based on objective rather than subjective or opinion-driven considerations. So I've called this presentation "The Rest of the Story" because I suspect that most of us are familiar with the hydrologic dilemma. And when I talk about the Nature Conservancy, I'm not alone. There's a crew of us here in Arizona. I think most of you are familiar with Jean Marie Haney, who lives here in Cottonwood, who is actually our state hydrologist. Pardon? Oh, here. I think I'm going to have to.
Right there.
Yeah.
Just give me a nod.
Well, here I can. Okay. Let's see. What I probably should have done. This is awkward. I'd love to be able to read this, but if I stand here, can you all see okay? Okay. And at any rate, Selena works with AmeriCorps, has been organizing volunteer crews to work up and down the Verde, particularly on things like exotic plant removal. Let's dive in. The Verde River is many things, but the two that are probably the most important to remember is it's one of, some people say, the last of the truly living rivers of Arizona. That it's contiguous or continuous from its headwaters down to the first dams, which gives it about 100 miles of unfettered flow. It's also, interestingly, one of the top 2 rivers in each of the categories of birds and fish and mammals. And if you throw in reptiles, it's in the top 3, and it goes on like that. Very, very significant statistics for the wildlife of the river, as well as the human. We know that the river contributes to the economic well-being in one way or another of about 3.5 million people, between those of us that live up here and those that live down in the valley. What I'm going to do is to run through 14 different products that have either just come out or shortly will. One of them was a water map that several of you have seen or used, where we started trying to calculate the value of the flowing water that's contributed from each of the 7 major tributaries, and as a result, how the river grows in its volume as it goes, but then also how it's consumed. And you probably can't see from there, but perhaps you have on the larger map, that these red dots indicate consumptive use of water along the river. It's a 189-mile long river from Paulden down to the Salt River, 500 miles of perennial stream. The top 26 miles are spring fed, and that's what, for many of us, the concern would be that those may be the first to go if indeed we start losing stretches of the river. We worry about the top because of the potential for pumping up above. 7 major tributaries, as I mentioned, 42 ditches, although again, it's probably 5, 6, or 7 of them that are really large enough to really have a huge impact on the river. 13,000 exempt wells at the point when these figures were gotten, 2,000 non-exempt wells, and roughly 2 million people depend on the river directly in one way or another for the surface flow or the groundwater pumping that it brings about. Ecology. 10% of all the cottonwood willow habitat in the state of Arizona, which is the rarest described forest type in North America, rarer than redwood trees, than tropical forest, than rainforest. 10% of all the cottonwood willow assemblage is found on the Verde River. Significant statistic. It's one out of only 3 places in the river where otters still reproduce naturally. Thousands of breeding birds. 3 important bird areas, the Audubon Society's IBA designation. Half of all the desert bald eagles in the state. 9 native fish still here. A half a dozen have gone or disappeared, but conceivably could be brought back. 42 reptiles, 18 amphibians, 49 mammals. This place is really a Noah's Ark. Many of those are threatened or endangered or nominated. I think you probably all have seen or read or heard about some of these critters, fish, birds, and others that are along the Verde that we are hoping to lifeboat to the future. I'm sorry, let me go back quickly. The map that underlies this slide is actually an indication of the number of native fish still to be found on the various tributaries of the Verde. Purple being the greatest, you'll see 7 to 9 species of native fish still found in this upper Verde stretch. Same thing at Oak Creek, and then with green a little less, blue a little less. We have lots of native fish. Whoops. 85% of all the wildlife of the area depend on the river or its tributaries for some part of their breeding cycle, their migratory needs, where they're born, where they live, what they eat. And therefore, without the Verde, a lot of the wildlife that we take for granted wouldn't be here. We're, I think, all of us aware, and if you're not, you should be, that it's one of the greatest densities of breeding birds, literally anywhere in the United States, but certainly anywhere in Arizona. Hence all the birding festivals and other things that so many people come here to enjoy. Probably at this point is contributing as much economically as the wine industry, and yet we don't hear as much about the birding industry. A study that we did recently, because it becomes very important for the rest of the story, is what about beaver? Turns out that beaver are possibly the most important single animal for the protection of the river. In fact, it has been said that second only to mankind, the beaver has been the most significant mammal or animal in the North American continent for bringing rivers back. We did a co-op with Prescott College, and it was perfect because there's nowhere better than Prescott College to get young, energetic kids willing to walk the scores and scores of miles up and down the river to produce the map that you're about to see. They mapped 16 miles of the 24 in the upper Verde. They determined the density of animals and the diet of animals. And of course, told us what we knew already, that beaver significantly influence the ecologic, hydrologic, and geomorphological balances of the watershed. All big words to say they make a lot of ponds that hold a lot of water back, that a lot of wildlife enjoy. Without beaver, things aren't right. Here's a quick index of what they eat. Gooding willow is 1/3 of their diet. Fremont cottonwood, 1/4 of their diet. And then a variety of other willows and other native plants, including 1% tamarisk. And if you ever tried to eat a tamarisk, you'll see why they don't eat any more of those. But this is what they found. From Paulden, where the highway crosses all the way down to just about to Clarkdale, there's a dam on average of every 2.5 miles, and a den or lodge about, I guess this got cut off, but about every 1.1 mile, there's a den or a lodge indicating activity of beaver in that area. Without beaver, we wouldn't probably have as many otter. We did an extensive series of studies and reports, and I think that Steve's reports in the newspaper, probably many of you saw, that we have a burgeoning population of otter. It's essentially returning to its original numbers since they were reintroduced in the mid-1980s. They live in the ponds that beaver create, and they live back in the dens that were abandoned by beaver. And I think a lot of people may not appreciate having otters running around their yards and their irrigation ditches, but without them, we would have far more crayfish predation on our native fish and frogs and other things than what we do currently. This study, one of three, indicated that up to 95% of the diet of many otters in most places along the Verde was comprised of crayfish. And if you weren't aware of it, crayfish are not native to here. They were an introduced species, and they are decimating populations of our native plants and animals. A second major study, we're doing more of these, are the relationship between the hydrology of the river, that is the pools and riffles and runs and glides, and the number of native fish that can be found in various stretches of the Verde. I think that I've said this essentially, but let's just remind ourselves that in addition to wildlife, you are dependent on the Verde. The watershed provides 40% of the water for Phoenix surface water supply in the SRP service area, but all of the water for Prescott Valley, Chino Valley, Sedona, Clarkdale, Cottonwood, and I'm afraid somebody might have gotten cut off, but we know that all of our unincorporated areas, most of the central part of Yavapai County is dependent on the river. This is a tough act, trying to balance the needs for wildlife and the needs for people is the thing that the Verde River Basin Partnership, that the Water Advisory Committee to the county, the Nature Conservancy, I think all of us are trying to strive to figure out what is this balance. And our view is without a lot of understanding and a lot of, you'll see the rest of these studies, we probably won't be able to make that judgment call very effectively. So, about every day, I have to practice this subliminal message number one. Because we're becoming so rapidly urbanized that some predictions say that there is no hope, that this lifeboat is sinking. I don't personally believe that. You can see there in brown, I'm sorry that this doesn't have a pointer, but this is the Verde Valley, right in through here. It's the second greatest amount of population growth that's occurring in the state, and it's said that the Verde Valley population is likely to double by 2035. We already know that 30% of all the wells drilled in Arizona are in Yavapai County, a great number of them, of course, right here. More people require more water. Groundwater ultimately takes the water out of the river, as I think most of us are well convinced and need no more convincing. But this is the sobering thing. If groundwater is likely to dry stretches of the river, look what's happened between three slides, 1950, 1974, and 2006. In 1950, you can scarcely see the red dots that represent the wells in the Verde Valley. By 1974, you can see the red. By 2006, it's a bloody scene. And if we do continue to double our population, it only gets worse from here. A lot of people say, oh, well, all of that water, not all of that water is being used by pumping only, it's being used by farms. But I think that some of the things that you need to think about in terms of irrigation is that it isn't just farms any longer that the irrigation ditches are serving. They are, as Pogo once said when going out to look for the enemy, they are us. Many of our homes that are on irrigation ditches, and I think probably several of us in the room are served by irrigation ditches, are now using water originally designed for farming. We're now flood irrigating our homes, requiring a tremendous amount of evaporation and loss of water, and redirecting the water away from the river in order to serve homes that could probably and certainly could provide water in other ways. It's not to say that agriculture is all homes and Bermuda grass. We do still have agricultural crops in the Verde Valley, quite a few of them. Some of them being redirected for new crops, some of which are more financially beneficial, and some certainly use less water than others. We know that the wine industry is one of those. Unfortunately, the wine industry doesn't find it easy to use irrigation ditches as much as they do groundwater pumping, because it is cleaner water. It's easier to get into drip irrigation systems. But many of our locally grown produce do use ditches. We are producing a tremendous amount of, or have the potential for producing a tremendous amount of vegetables and other things that could be in use in restaurants in Sedona and other places. And many of them can use water much more efficiently than what they currently are. They could be using drip irrigation, underground tape drip, and all kinds of other methods. And these are things that we would encourage us to look at as a community to buy those produce from places that use water more efficiently, and to pass up those that don't. But all irrigation requires diverting flow from the river. Now, this is not quite fair. This actual dam is diverting water into Peck's Lake, not actually into an irrigation ditch, but it's significant. You'll see in a minute that there are a couple of ditches that use dams, usually push-up dams, bulldozers down in the river, down in the gravel, to divert the entire flow of the river into their ditches. Here are some interesting statistics about how that water is used. Right now, there's just over 5,000 acres of land under irrigation in the Verde Valley. 40% of this is on properties of 5 acres or less, and only 7% on acreages of 100 acres or more. And what that's telling us is that farming isn't the biggest user of water in the Verde Valley, in contrast to what I believe a lot of people think. These irrigation ditches are in large part serving homes. 7 large ditches are on the main stem of the river, most of which, all of these 7, divert far more water than is needed. In fact, in one case, 17 times more water than is actually needed for the crops that are being grown, or for the water rights that are being held by the people that use that ditch. What this is telling us is it's not very efficient. This is irrigation that is not well directed to the specific crops, to people that have specific rights to be using water from the river. And most of this is going into overwatering Bermuda grass. All of us, we all have Bermuda grass lawns, and I think we probably overwater them. It's hard to kill Bermuda, but a lot of people will go out literally every week, some twice a week, to water, to flood irrigate their yard when they absolutely don't need to. There are small orchards and farms and hay and corn and other crops, and they are important and we should protect them. I don't think that we should trade in the baby for the bath. I don't think anybody's talking about getting rid of agriculture. Let's save what we have, let's make it efficient, but let's also keep in mind who the real users are for these ditches. You can't see them here, but these are some of the main ditches in the Verde Valley. We do all kinds of funny contortions with our ditches. Anybody that's seen this view may wonder, what's going on here? Well, this is an irrigation ditch taking water way over the river from a long way upstream. The problem from a biological perspective isn't that the water is being used efficiently or not, it's that it's being diverted away from the river, in some cases 100%. Doug, you may recognize this place. Isn't this? I think you have. I think you look right down on this from your home. This is an indication, and there are a couple of them, where the entire river gets diverted for half a mile, quarter of a mile to a half a mile. And in some cases, we have ditches that can traverse 4 full miles before the first irrigator uses any water at all. Well, here's the question. We were talking about native fish, where we have this wonderful fish fauna, 9 that are still left. If you want to think about the lifestyle, the behavior of native fish, you need to think about birds, because fish and birds share a lot in common. They migrate. Native fish don't like hot water for the most part any more than we would. And they'll find cliffs or deep areas or areas where brush creates shade. And if they can't, they will go up a river and up a tributary, and they may spend the summer up there. Same thing in the wintertime. When it's too cold up there, a lot of fish, large and small, come down to where it's sunnier. Well, if you've diverted the river and they can't get past that diversion, you have really essentially thwarted the ecologic evolutionary adaptation that those fish have developed over the millennia. So dewatering sections is a definite impediment for our native fish. There are a couple of other things too, and again, this is a pretty quick skim. This is like a table of contents of a lot more that is coming. We will be giving a presentation later this year on some studies that we've recently done on climate change here in Yavapai County. And we're expecting to release this study in May, but what we will be saying and showing and demonstrating using good hard data is that Yavapai County has warmed not quite 6%, but about 2+ degrees centigrade. Our county has warmed this nearly 6 degrees Fahrenheit in the last 50 years. We don't know exactly what that means, but it means something. It definitely is going to mean something to native animals. It's going to mean something to do with pinon juniper forests and whether they can still persist. It's going to have something to do with the rate of evaporation in our yards and in our farms. It's turning out, and we'll add more as we actually release the thing in May, but it's turning out that it isn't just the temperature that's changing, it's also when we're getting our precipitation. We seem to be getting more of what scientists love to call stochastic events, which are unpredictable, heavy-duty storms at times that weren't predictable and haven't been seen on a regular basis over time. We're also seeing that we're losing winter precipitation in the form of snow in our high country. And that is very significant because that's generally what assures the even flow of water throughout the year. At any rate, stay tuned. You'll see more as we release this stuff. Too many of you have heard me say this too many times. I just, hope reigns eternal. But our hope is that in groups like this and a lot of others, that reasonable people, and we don't like to assume that you and we are all reasonable, equally well informed, are likely to agree. And we are actually seeing that. We've been given a bit of a reprieve. The housing market isn't building homes as rapidly as it was at one point. Some of the threats of pumping have been temporarily subdued. And we're getting a chance, all of us, to get out and talk to our neighbors more about what the future may look like. For my money, in the Verde Valley, the best news probably could have been, should have been, the further development of the Verde River Greenway. State Park started a very, very good thing when they started the Verde River Greenway here. They've done a great job of getting Dead Horse State Park, the 6 miles of Greenway up and down from the Dead Horse State Park, in a pretty good place. And they made a decision about 3 years ago to expand the Verde River Greenway all the way down to the Wild and Scenic River and potentially all the way up to Sycamore Creek, which would be a 40-mile greenway. And if we could get all of us to agree that that's the lifeboat, I think we'd all be a lot in better shape. The greenway, I like to think about, is 40 miles long. It started 25 years ago. It happened that Bruce Babbitt was the governor then, and he was very keen that the Verde River be one that gets lifeboated into the future. And we also know that it's lifeboating a huge number of species of birds, lots of really wonderful places, some economic opportunities like the Verde Valley Birding and Nature Festival and the Verde River Days. And of course, just yesterday or Saturday, the Verde Canoe Challenge. Do you guys participate? Nope. Anybody here? Any awards? Tony did. Tony's our designate. I don't have to show you Dead Horse State Park, Peck's Lake, Tavasi Marsh. Tavasi Marsh is said to be the largest freshwater marsh in Arizona off of the main stem of the Colorado River. Some of those big wildlife refuges down there are bigger than Tavasi, but inland, this is the largest marsh in our state. We should take better care of it. We want national parks to go from Tavasi Marsh to including Peck's Lake and ultimately safeguard the Tavasi and Peck's Lake on into the future. You guys are doing a good job so far. We just have to add to your, to your portfolio over time. Land acquisition is something that the Nature Conservancy itself is doing. I think that you're all aware that we started by buying the Upper Verde Springs property where Granite Creek comes down at Stillman Lake to give rise to the start of the flow of the Verde River. And then 2 years ago bought the Rocking River Ranch, which we then transferred to Arizona State Parks Department. So they now have down at the south end of the Verde Valley, down near Beasley, the functional equivalent of a Dead Horse State Park on the upper end. And someday to see both of them kind of be the bookends of a greenway would be fabulous. Then last year we acquired right across the river the Shield Ranch from the Schill family. I think many of you read about that in the paper. We have another preserve that's upstream from I-17 on the river. In 5 years, we have actually purchased for the Verde 1,600 acres of land and gotten easements over 2,500, totaling about 5 river miles and roughly $20 million in investment. You can't see it very well. Rocking River is a beautiful place. It's very similar to Dead Horse State Park if you haven't had a chance to visit. And Shield, for anybody that goes down the river on any kind of a floatable device, it's that big white cliff, kind of the white cliffs of Dover that you see as you're floating down the river. Another major project that we have underway that we're very excited, and when it's released it'll probably make as big a difference for the biology, the understanding of the biology of the river, as the upcoming USGS regional groundwater model will for the hydrology. Environmental flows is a branch of science that a number of people have collaborated to bring to the current day, but we developed formulated a series of a method with a series of steps that we developed with the Army Corps of Engineers around managing dams. Now that may sound odd. We don't have dams on the Verde River, but the methodology talks about if you have any way to control the flow of water and you can better replicate the natural flood events, for instance, or assure base flow, etc., then you can key that to particular species of interest. It's possible to do, and we believe on the Verde River it's entirely possible to do. We are now piloting a project with the U.S. Geological Survey, creating what they feel and claim is going to be the first model of its kind for any arid river in the Southwest that is very comparable to what they've already done in the big rivers of the salmon rivers of the Northeast or the big fish of the Mississippi, where there are great environmental flows models. We don't have anything like that in any of our rivers in the Southwest, and the Verde will be the first of them. We raised funds through a couple of national foundations. It's a 4-year project. They're finishing their 2nd year. At the end of the 4th year, we'll be able to release it, and what it will say with some definity, is that a word? That this fish, that bird, this habitat type needs exactly this much water over this kind of an annual cycle in order to continue to persist. Is there anything? Yeah, the second to last bullet, it takes into account the magnitude of water flow, the timing of different water flow events, the duration, and the frequency of the natural flow or the base flow. This is a chart that might be a bit useful to understand what's coming in the environmental flows model. As you walk across this bottom of this graph, you're going to see the months of the year, January to December. And you take a look, and it's not surprising that in the winter and early spring months, we're getting most, if not all, of our spring runoff from the snowpack up above. You're going to see that as we go into summer, we get our base flow, which starts off something like 20 CFS up at the headwaters and continue all the way down, getting deeper and deeper and deeper, the normal base flow all the way through. And then in the summer, when we get monsoons, we see spikes of flooding events that turn out to be essential for some of the attributes that these critters need. And then we start in on our winter rains again. Then you see in the same calendar, you can see where cottonwoods are releasing seeds right about now, March through May. Where they leave off, the willows begin doing the same thing. Later in the summer, you get wetland birds migrating out. Let me jump up to some that are coming in. You get the in-migration of some birds. This is the southwest willow flycatcher. Just about the time the cottonwoods have released their seeds and are getting their leaves, we're starting to get some of our birds in. They're nesting through the summer, raising young, and then migrating away come September and into October. It's interesting to see that the fish are also dependent on these seasons. They're doing a very similar thing. You get the spawning, no surprise, during the ends of these big peaks of floods at the end of the winter. If we ever created a dam on the Verde River and cut off those spikes, we would almost certainly lose a large cohort of our native fish. And then the young fish that are eggs and larvae are growing are starting to happen here in the summer. These kinds of correlations between plants and animals are essential both to understand but also to continue to replicate. Another study, one that has actually come out, and if you picked up a copy, I don't see any, but here at the front desk, is a 4-page fact sheet put out by the U.S. Geological Survey about another recent study that was just done that we think is a tool that should be very useful for the utility managers for in most of our towns. We funded the U.S. Geological Survey to do it, but it is their work. They used the data sets out of the USGS's upcoming Northern Arizona Regional Groundwater Model. They did the work, we didn't. We still don't have a copy of the groundwater model. Of course, we're all dying to see it. But it's a tool for communities to make better informed decisions about where to both take out water and put water back into natural systems. And what this is actually showing, and the model itself goes through much more complexity than this because we have several different aquifers at different depths. But in very simplest terms, if you were a town of, say, Cottonwood or Camp Verde, you might be interested to know that where it's red, if you were to take a municipal well, you're likely in a 10-year period to be taking water away from the Verde River more rapidly than an area that gets out into these cooler colors. If you were Cottonwood and you could take water here, it may take 30 years before you would actually see a cone of depression occur and actually start capturing the water, taking the water away from the river. In contrast, where it's red, these are the places where the pumps would do the most harm the most quickly, but also the places where if you could recharge your sewage effluent, you could do the most good the most rapidly. Because any recharge wells in these red areas, or yellow or orange, are likely to get the water back into the river the most quickly, and recharging into these blue areas would have the longest impact on bringing water to the river itself. The so-called SEGWAR model is available, and we're hoping that utility directors throughout our region will use it. On the back is the name of the individuals that you could talk to that could take you through the model, and they'd be happy to do it. We also became concerned because we are, all of us, suggesting that more sewage effluent does need to be put back into the ground, but we were concerned when we started hearing these stories from various places about the effects of some of the so-called emerging contaminants that are going into natural groundwater via injected water or recharged water. So we hired Catherine Proper, David Quanrud. Perhaps some of you ventured over to Prescott. It was a golly, Ed, how long was it? It must have been a 7-hour day.
Yeah, it was a full day.
Where over 100 people filled a room. We spent a lot of time hearing experts talking about what are the concerns that we should be aware of. And it turns out that there are a lot of concerns. There are a number of things. I mean, some of the simplest ones are things like caffeine that you cannot get out through conventional sewage treatment, that do end up in natural water bodies, and they simulate some of the female hormones that affect the water where native fish live. And in some cases, caffeine is just one of 40 of them, that can actually prohibit the young fish from becoming equally male and female. And you can get this preponderance, 70, 80, 90% of all the fish being female, and therefore lose the reproductive ability for these fish to continue to thrive. And we had a whole series of engineering solutions that were suggested about how to avoid that over time. I think most of us walked out of the room and went, oh, ye gads, there's no way. This is really almost hopeless. But I think that sometimes we just need to embrace these insurmountable opportunities, and it turns out that there are a whole lot of engineering solutions to some of these things if we're willing to pay for it and be patient. Finally, the last big study that I think is going to affect you all here is an economic analysis that we're currently undertaking with a core group of advisors. Many of you are sitting here, to take a look at the various uses of water in the Verde Valley, going up from Sedona on the top and then all the way down through, to try to determine what is our surface and groundwater's value to us in terms of our local economies. And I think that armed with that, you'll do a better job of assuring that your water is never dewatered, or your river's not dewatered. It's a 9-month study. It's asking these 4 questions, so stay tuned. This is what we're hoping will come out to you. The economic value of a healthy river to your communities, economic and investment consequences to your communities of uncertainty, the feasibility of various approaches to managing the river, both regulatory and market-based. We've done a lot of consumer polling. Some of you may have answered the phone and helped to answer some of our questions. And we're going to several other communities in New Mexico, Texas, and Oregon, communities that have had similar issues to ours, and see how they managed it. And I'm going to just buzz through a couple last pictures here. Some of you could see yourselves in these. We have a lot of different uses that bring income to our communities. Birding being one, boating being another. These creative hybrids, water to wine, floating down to wineries. And then 2 final ones. We're still working with all of the farmers that are willing to consider conservation easements, or either giving or selling the subdivision development rights to their properties, hoping that we can keep these what's left of the large farms intact, because we think that that's better in many cases for the river than subdivisions. And the final thing that you're going to hear more and more about as we start doing more of it is making ditches more efficient. We're now working with, as I mentioned, a number of ditch companies to actually create head gates that are controllable, to line stretches of ditches, to in some cases actually withdraw water up and out of the river instead of always down from the river. How to use laser leveling, which some of our farmers in our valley already employ, but all could, that makes their crops much, much more efficient. And finally, we have a whole cadre of volunteers that I think many of you have seen. In this case, we have Chip Norton down on the right-hand corner, and Selena Powell, who's from AmeriCorps, and Kim Schoenig, and a whole crew of individuals. And we've had just about every weekend, we've joined with a lot of other groups in the Verde Valley to take better care of this place. If you're interested in any of these studies, the ones that have come out or the ones that are still in the making, you're welcome to go to azconservation.org, and you should find most of them there. So basically what this picture is showing is that the red areas follow Oak Creek the whole way down, and the reason is that Oak Creek, of most or all of our other creeks, is rocky. And the degree to which it's rocky means that you can dry it up fast, but you can also recharge very fast. And there are very few places with alluvial sediments around Oak Creek where you have more of a buffered withdrawal and or recharge. Does that get at your question that you were looking at? It's a very good observation that Tom has made, that if you give it more time, say an extra decade to finally get to the river, you're likely to get cleaner water, and that's absolutely true. And the question, of course, always comes down to quantity and quality, and there's going to be a trade-off between them. Apropos of your first question, it has been done in many communities where, as a part of mitigation, if an entity is forced to mitigate, something like extending the effluent outfall to a place where it's more appropriate may happen in this community, but paid for by that community, because they're the ones that need to do the mitigation. And this may be something that in the next 10 or 15 years we start exploring regionally throughout our whole county. Well, we're very happy to say that there are 3 major foundations that have supported this work up until now, and one of them, we and others were able to help convince that they should broaden what they were doing to a community-wide basis. And there are now 11 different groups that are being funded by the Walton Family Foundation, and there is no reason to think that that won't continue over the next 10 years or more. They are committed to this river as their kind of dog in the fight on the protection of the Colorado River Plateau, and I would encourage us all to continue to be creative about future uses of the Walton Family Foundation money. There are a couple of other sources. A couple of us are involved with the RAC, which is monies coming from the Forest Service to the county, and there's another tranche of $250,000 that we're going to be able to make some decisions about. Much of that will come to the benefit of the river. And then there are other foundations starting to pay more and more attention. And finally, I can't really talk about it too much, but there are some Fortune 100 companies in the Phoenix area that are trying to blue up their images. We all know about greenwashing. There's something known as blue washing. They're worrying about their water footprint, and they're trying to figure out how can they assure real water is being conserved. We think the Verde is the right place to do it, and they can get credit for doing it. So we're trying to provide some opportunities for them. So I'm actually I feel fairly good about the funding opportunities in the future.